Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Listen with Vobes. I'm Richard Vobes, and it's 4 o'clock here in the UK, and I am continuing to read The Children of the Archbishop by Norman Collins, and it's lovely to see you here. Let's find out who's out there coming along. We've got the lovely Julia. Good afternoon to you. Turbo Stream is out there. He says he's halfway through disassembling my bike, or dissembling, not disassembling my bike's gears to fit a new chain. It's all gone to slack. Is that a push bike or a motorbike? Holly and Co, hello to you. Billabong O'Neill, hello to you. Audrey Forbes, just what I asked Billabong O'Neill. What kind of bike is it? Philip Hammond and Mary, good afternoon to you and everyone. Steve G, Justine Jones, Cooper 68, Audrey Forbes, sunny, she says. Lucky you, been cold and damp here all day. We have had some sun here. It's all going down now, but we did have some sun. Witchfinder General, good afternoon to you. And Susan Luca, hello to you. I've got one of my hot lemon and gingers here without any honey, which I'm getting together. Edward Moulding has arrived. It's lovely to see you. We're just coming up to 4 o'clock now, so just give people a moment to get here. And of course, we are on chapter 37, I think it is, in the book. So that should be about right now. I'm going to take a slurp of this. That is delicious. Actually, it's more lemony than gingery, that one. Turbo Stream says, push bike, 2,500 miles in 18 months. 2,500 miles in 18 minutes is what I thought you said. And I thought, bye. Good heavens, that's pretty fast. That is pretty fast. Peter Coombs. Hello to you, Peter Coombs. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming along. I think we'll crack on. 23 people watching. Very kind of you. 24 now, apparently, which is rather nice. This is lovely. I hope you're all warm. Right. 37 is the chapter we're on. Sensible Porn, good afternoon. Got all my cookies ready and my coffee. Excellent. Share the cookies around, will you? So, Mrs. Warple was now a permanent resident in the warden's lodging. Mrs. Warple. And her presence... I'm just trying to remember Mrs. Warple, because she's the bishop's wife. That's right. That's just so we know. So she's gone down to the warden's residence because Dr. Trump has obviously clearly gone over to her because the bishop has died. That's right. I'm just getting my memory back into it. And her presence ominously hung over Dr. Trump, distracting and destroying. Even at night, sometimes, indeed, especially at night, when he was wakeful, he was aware of her in a sullen, uneasy way, as though she were a low thundercloud that threatened at any moment to burst over him. Not that Mrs. Warple had at first given the slightest cause for complaint. She had been exemplary, that is, as exemplary as any permanent invalid can be. There were, of course, the little cups of tea, as Felicity always referred to them, though to Dr. Trump's eye they looked exactly the same size as other cups, that she was constantly taking to her mother. There were the packets of cigarettes for her nerves. There was the breast of chicken, the only part of the meat that Mrs. Warple, in her weak condition, could tolerate. And as Dr. Trump scraped gloomily at a leg, Felicity would come downstairs, happy and radiant, to say that Mrs. Warple could just manage the other side. But this was not the worst. For as Dr. Trump noted gloomily, Mrs. Warple was growing stronger every day. She now had what she called her good spells. And when these were on, she went round the house from room to room, interfering, managing, rearranging things. She had been up 3 whole days last week. The physical restoration of Mrs. Walpole... No, I keep saying Warpole. I don't mean Warpole. I don't know why I keep saying that. Warple. Warple. I do apologise. The physical restoration of Mrs. Warple and the discovery about Sebastian's chest were practically simultaneous, and in prospect, almost equally alarming. In prospect. For a start, I don't know who Sebastian is. I think we're going to find this out. For a start, Mrs. Warple was almost completely recovered. Every day was a good day now. She had not merely taken to coming down for breakfast, but she actually came down singing. Nor were the snatches of the song the kind of thing that Dr. Trump liked to hear. Only this week, the words "Tarara Bumdie" had reached him clearly from the bathroom landing. Moreover, she was displaying a highly developed and particularly maddening form of nervous energy. It was obvious, pathetically obvious, that she was trying to make herself useful, to take some of the strain off Felicity, as she put it. In the result, Dr. Trump lived in a state of perpetual apprehension. His coffee cup was snatched from him at breakfast, almost before he'd been given time to put it down. His shaving brush, which he left always in full lather, like a creamy white cauliflower, was, on Mrs. Warple's instructions, carefully rinsed each morning under the cold tap. And the cushion of his chair, which he preferred hard and flat, was assiduously thumped and pounded into the consistency of a souffle. It was like having a loving enemy about the place. What do they call that now? There's a word for that, isn't there? Somebody who's a loving enemy. They call... what do they call it when people are like that? They're nice but nasty at the same time. My father's ex was like that. She was nasty, but she did it in a way that was too sickly sweet. I can't remember the term. It'll come to me. Somebody will write it down there, I'm sure. But all this was nothing compared to the news about Sebastian. It had, of course, been known right from the start that the child was delicate. A sudden change in the wind, the slightest dampness around the feet or legs, the nursery door left thoughtlessly ajar, or a button come undone amid the several thicknesses of his chill-proof underwear, and Sebastian's snufflings and wheezings would inevitably begin. Sebastian is obviously his son with Felicity, Dr. Trump's son. That's right. Frenemy. No, it's... what do they call it? There's a term, isn't there, that people use... Yes, passive-aggressive. There we go. Thank you, Holly and Co. That's it. Passive... Vile, yes, that's another one. But passive-aggressive, it's like they're... You look at it thinking, well, you're being kind, but actually what you're doing is being quite nasty. In such circumstances, there would, within any household, be precautions. A son and heir, especially when he is the only child, is naturally precious, not to say irreplaceable. There could be no argument about that, but when he had once raised the point, asking diffidently, even timidly, don't you think, do you, dear, think that perhaps we might try another method, the hardening process, you know? The effect on Felicity had been deplorable. It had roused the she-tiger and the vixen, for she had instantly rounded on him, demanding whether he wanted to lose Sebastian in just the way that she had lost her own poor father, for precisely the same reasons too. And then, what made it so deeply humiliating for Dr. Trump was that Felicity's worst fear was suddenly confirmed. Expert 3 guinea opinion from Harley Street agreed in everything. The child's lungs were not yet actually affected. That much was agreed on by general practitioner and specialist alike. But at least there was a weakness. And the air of Putney, though bracing, was not apparently bracing enough. Switzerland was mentioned. There was talk of Montreux, Grenoble, and I don't know where this place is. Chamonix? That's not right, I know. I feel totally inadequate and ignorant. Chmonix. How do you pronounce that? Chamonix. Can't be right. But anyway, and I don't even know where it is. And although very much Dr. Trump's relief, it was Broadstairs that was finally... and though very much to Dr. Trump's relief, it was Broadstairs that was finally chosen, there was an uneasiness within his mind that he was... that was powerless to dispel. For the moment when the truth about Sebastian's lungs had been discovered, Dr. Trump had been uncomfortably aware of being ignored, passed over, spurned. Don't pronounce the X, says Lee. Oh, Chamonix. Is it Chamonix? Chamonix. Why put the X on the end if you don't pronounce it? Bloody words. How would you know it's there? How would you know to write it? Anyway, yes, he was being brushed. What? For the moment, when he was being spurned. Whenever he had tried fleetingly to reassert himself, he'd been brushed aside. Try as he could no longer conceal from himself the fact that, compared with his own son, he himself apparently did not exist. Even one sentence, "Much as I love my son, my place is still beside my husband," or "But if I go off like this, who is to protect after poor Samuel?" would have been sufficient. As it turned out, however, there was nothing. Just silence, complete and deeply wounding silence. There had, moreover, been a sudden marked increase in Felicity's affection for her mother. The two of them were always whispering together nowadays, and on one occasion it had even been worse. Felicity and her mother had been sitting there together, bunched occupyingly round the fire, when Felicity had turned her head slightly and remarked, "If you want to do anything, don't bother about us." And now, suddenly the whisperings were all explained, and the worst imaginable, had happened. While Felicity and Sebastian were wintering in the fine, preventative air of Broadstairs, Mrs. Worple was to stay in Putney to look after Dr. Trump. Chamonix is the shadow of Mont Blanc. I flew to Grenoble, says Ben Reeve. It looked like a French version of Slough. Doubt it would do the lungs any good. There you are. Thank you very much for that. Good old Slough. Within a week, everything had changed. Oh, sorry, within a week. I'm not reading very well again today. Sorry about that. It's the end of the week. It's Friday. Can't get it right every day. Within a week, everything had been arranged. It was February at the time, and Felicity and Sebastian, accompanied by Dr. Trump, went down in a hired car at odious expense to install themselves in a private hotel that Felicity had selected. It was the Ragusa that she had chosen. I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced. The rooms themselves seemed as comfortable as anything can be in the out-of-season wilderness of a seaside town. Indeed, so far as bead mats and fancy stenciled runners could make them, they verged upon the lavish. But the position! Dr. Trump sat muffled in his great coat during the return journey. He prayed that Felicity and Dr. Arlett and the specialist, the whole damn bunch of them, in fact, had not blundered. It seemed to him, however, unthinkable that anyone, let alone a delicate child, should be carted off somewhere to a place where the wind came ripping in off the foreshore like a cascade of iced razor blades, and a sea fog like a wet Shetland shawl tucked the town up for the night immediately after tea time. If he had been compelled to stay there for as much as a single week, he did not doubt for a moment that it would not merely be his lungs, but the very marrow in his bones that would be affected. It was therefore with a kind of despondent relief to be back again amidst the almost balmy air of Putney that he turned the key of his front door, and was confronted by Mrs. Warple, who had been sitting up, waiting for him. End of that chapter. We're now on chapter 38. Are we all doing well? I think we are. It had been one of Margaret's bad days. An outbreak of summer colic had filled the sick bay, and Margaret had been on her feet ever since the early morning. She was tired now, very tired, and as she lay in bed, she rubbed one swollen ankle against the other and tried to find softness between the ridges of the hard, unyielding mattress. It was either 3 or 4 now, she couldn't remember which had struck last. There was, in fact, only one thing that she could remember, and that was a letter that she had to write, or rather couldn't write because she didn't know what to say. It was her secret life catching up with her again. Something kept creeping in and intruding just when it looked as though everything was beginning to settle down again. And she hadn't got any more money left. At least, not enough to make a difference. Not enough to keep another human being going. Because this wasn't blackmail, or at least not blackmail in the ordinary sense, this was a sort of wheedling, insidious, emotional blackmail, the kind of thing where nothing unpleasant could happen, even if you didn't pay anything, nothing, that is, except for another of those anguishing crybaby letters and a hint of prison or suicide. As it was no use trying to sleep, she put the light on again. It shone straight down into her eyes, but that didn't trouble her because she wasn't going to lie there looking up at it. She was going to read what had been written to her. It was within arm's reach as she lay there, in her handbag down between the bed and the wall. The letter was written on that kind of thin, crinkly paper that people use overseas. It was as though it had been dried up in the sunlight that had been too hot for it. Either that or it was the cheapest that could be bought, probably both. And the fact that it was written in pencil didn't make it any more encouraging. Harder to read that way, and with a suggestion of real poverty. Holding it down so the light didn't shine through, Margaret began to read. Just like my bad luck, and when everything seemed to have turned the corner too. If I had the capital and could have hung on a bit longer, I'd be worth something today. All the others showed a profit, eventually. As it was, I had to sell out what I could. And when I settled everything, I was stony again, quite cleared out, in fact. I think I shall go back up north, where the competition isn't so fierce. It's really chronic down here, what with the Jews and everything. But before I see anyone, I need a decent suit and a pair of shoes. It's no good going after a job looking like a beachcomber. I'd rather be on the land, but beggars can't be choosers, and if I'm presentable enough, there's a new place opening down at the... Margaret didn't read any further. There was another full page asking her not to misjudge him and say how he hated to seem like a sponger. But she had read all that before in his last letter, and the one before that, and the one before that too. In fact, in every letter. He had never wrote to her unless he wanted something, and even though, somewhere towards the end, he always said that he loved her and everything would turn out all right, and that he was living for the day when he could send her the money for the fare, it never came to anything. And what was worse is she had entirely given up believing him. Given up years ago. She had even become reconciled to the fact that he was a waster, a no-gooder, a remittance man. But she still loved him, and that was all there was to it. Not that she was going to send him anything. Not this time. She still had herself to think about. It wasn't the same as being at the hospital as it had been with Dame Eleanor. The money wasn't much for a start, and she wasn't getting any younger. It was all right slaving away 12 hours a day at 30, but what about 10 years further on, or even 15, or 20? She'd be 50 by then, and it wouldn't be such a good idea to find herself with nothing in the post office savings bank at 50. Not with her other responsibilities, that is. She put the letter back into the envelope and thrust it deep down into the handbag alongside the other letters, all with the same handwriting. Then she lay there, still with the light on, staring up at the ceiling, right into the glare of the bare bulb this time. Why she was in this small upper attic anyway, instead of the big comfortable bedroom at the Cedars, she asked herself. Because of Sweetie. Sweetie wasn't like all the other girls. Other little girls could take care of themselves, but Sweetie couldn't. She was always getting herself into trouble. If she went on like that, she would be getting into bad trouble one day, really bad trouble. That was why somebody who cared for her had to stand by and see that everything went right. But how long could that go on? Sweetie was nearly 12 already. In 2 years the hospital would have finished with her. She would be out in some service somewhere, on her own then, completely and absolutely on her own at last. Margaret would go trailing all over London after her. Of course she would try to see her, if the child wanted it, and if she could find out from Mrs. Prynne where Sweetie had been sent, she could keep an eye on her without Sweetie knowing anything about it. But it wouldn't last. After all, Sweetie had her own life ahead of her. And when Sweetie left, Margaret realised that her real reason for being at the Bodkin Hospital would have been taken away from her. She liked to think that she cared for all the children in the way that she cared for Sweetie, but it simply wasn't true. When Sweetie left, she was going to leave too. She was going to earn all she could to buy that steamer ticket. If her passage money didn't come from the other end, she was going to find it this one. If her passage money didn't come from the other end, she was going to find it at this one, all on her own account. She was going to join the waster. Not quite sure what the waster being her brother, presumably. How are we doing? I'm just looking at the thing. Typically English, that's a joke, says Martin Cannon. Joke Martin. What are we going? The French for you. Oh, what do you mean? That's the French for you. Hello. Let's not have any arguments, any argy-bargy out there. Chapter 34. Margaret need not, however, have bothered about the steamer ticket. At least not yet, when, if she had it already in her bag, she could not have used it, because Sweetie suddenly showed how much she needed her. In a sense, it was all Ginger's fault. He was missing. Been out all night, 2 nights, in fact, and when Sweetie heard, she grew hysterical about it. It was this side of Sweetie's nature that alarmed Margaret. It revealed everything that she had feared for in the child, and it reminded her that no matter what happened, her place was beside Sweetie until she had grown out of that kind of thing. In comparison with the fuss that Sweetie made, there had been little or no commotion about Ginger's departure. He'd been out on so many of these outings by now, so routine, he had been out on so many of these outings by now that that routine had supplemented. I can't say it. Supplemented melodrama. He merely rolled his day clothes into a bundle, laid it carefully on the centre of the bed, pulled the sheet and blanket round it, and tucked in the pillow. Not that Mr. Dawlish would have noticed anything amiss if Ginger had hung a placard saying "back in half an hour" at the end of his bedstead. Apart from the excuse me, bit of COVID. Apart from the counterfeit beneath the bedclothes, there was a little matter of the money. Ginger had drawn the whole of his savings for his expedition, 8pence, all in coppers. And, not being accused of having too much loose cash about him, he took extraordinary precautions. There was 2pence in each trouser pocket and 4pence in a belt around his middle. What was more, the 2pences were wrapped inside strips of old shirt because the holes in his trouser pockets were so large that pennies by themselves would have just slipped through like quicksilver. The goodbyes were formal and deliberately casual. "So long, Ginger," was all that Spud said. And "So long, Spud, see you in the morning," was what Ginger had answered. With that, he was gone. Over the leads, down the drainpipe, along the catwalk to the jumping-off place, with the jungles and the gold mines of London lying there waiting for him as soon as he chose to go among them. What are you up to there then? Typically English, that's a joke. Da-da-da. The surgeon who went to the First Fleet. Oh, that was John White. Oh well, he was a good friend. Sorry, it's not you. Have a good day. Righto. Having a blurb. Part 2 of this. It was June, and the night was fine and rather sultry. There was still a lot of daylight left hanging about in the heavens, and there were more people in the streets than Ginger had expected. That was why he had to look so slippy. At once he got going. He didn't spare himself. Archbishop Bodkin Hospital to St. Mark's Avenue bus stop in under 2 minutes. After the run, it was a bit slow, sort of silly anticlimax, waiting for the bus. There had been 2 buses in the other direction by the time Sid Harris swerved in from Wimbledon direction. Do you remember Sid Harris was in the bus right at the very, very beginning, and we were hearing about him in the introduction. He was driving worse than ever nowadays, Sid was, not deliberately taking risks, but just swinging in and out of the other traffic as though there was no one but himself to think about. Nor, in a sense, was there. He was more self-absorbed and preoccupied than ever nowadays. He was still proud of his bus. It was the new Model T, 40 horsepower, double-back wheels that he was now driving, and still waiting for the surprise legacy to come along. Ginger made his way onto the top deck and took the outside front seat. This was exciting, this was. He had never been on a bus before, and it got better. There, in front of him, was a river. A river. And, incredible fact, no one at the hospital had ever so much as mentioned it. What was more, the river was behaving in the most enchanting way possible. It was supporting shipping. The bus was actually on the bridge by now, and there below him was a barge, his first barge, a long black hull piled high with bundles of something, and with a man standing on the top of them. As Ginger looked, the barge slid silently between the piles of Putney Bridge. Naturally, Ginger got up to see it out of the opposite window as it emerged, and in doing so, he bumped into Mr. Edward Musk, the conductor, who had come up to collect the fares. This was one of Mr. Musk's down days. Mrs. Musk was still lingering on, even though that it was obvious that the end was due any day now, and what with the housework and reading the Bible to her and seeing to Pussy, Mr. Musk was so tired he kept wishing that he was dead himself. That's why he was rather short with Ginger. And when Ginger held out the twopence and asked for St. Paul's Cathedral, he thought that he was being a bit fresh with him. It was a matter of fact a bad moment for Ginger too, because when Mr. Musk said that they didn't go anywhere near St. Paul's Cathedral, it left Ginger sullen and incredulous. Then, at the sight of the twopence held under his nose, Mr. Musk suddenly asked Ginger if he was under 12. For all Ginger knew, there was a law against people under 12 riding in a bus. "I'm 15, what d'you think?" he replied. 15 sounded better than 13, altogether more manly and independent, and that settled it. "South Kensington, that's where you get off," Mr. Musk told him as he punched a twopenny ticket. "And if you don't get off when I say South Kensington, I'll come up and put you off." Standing afterwards at the corner of Brompton Road, Ginger felt desperate and lost. He paused to consider. Unless he did something definite, and did it soon, the expedition was going to be a washout. He was still in search of London, and the real trouble seemed to be that London was so big that he couldn't find it. There was a policeman opposite whom he could have asked, but he was keeping clear of policemen. So he tried the paper seller instead. The paper seller was altogether better. He looked the sort of man who might be keeping clear of the policeman himself. And he was very nice and understanding. He knew all about St. Paul's Cathedral and Paddington Station and Buckingham Palace and the Zoo. Buckingham Palace was easiest, he said. A penny bus to Hyde Park Corner, and you were practically on top of it. After that, he added, Ginger had better ask again. Not that things were going too well for Ginger. It was another penny bus ride to Hyde Park Corner, and there was more than a third of his capital simply frittered away on travel, nothing to show for it. And Hyde Park Corner itself was rotten, the rottenest place he'd ever been to. It was all open spaces, simply flat fields with street lamps strung across them. He turned his back on it, and because it looked brighter that way, he set off, moth-like, down Piccadilly towards the lights. The further he went, the better it got. The houses closed in, and it became a town again. But what a town! Lights in the windows, the smell of scent and cigar smoke in the air, the noise of voices all around him. Long, gleaming cars threaded in and out of the scarlet rows of buses, and some of them had lights on inside, and it was like looking into other people's drawing rooms as they slid past. He noticed one car in particular. There was a man just getting into it. The man himself was peculiar enough. He was dressed like some sort of monster penguin, with a shiny white shirt front like polished emerald, and little pointed shoes as bright as black diamonds. It was at the lady who was with him that made Ginger look most. She seemed happy enough, not miserable and crying as Ginger would have expected, but there was nothing on her shoulders. Absolutely nothing. Naked, in fact. At the sight of her, Ginger blushed. He could feel a fiery wave of hotness passing right through him, a sort of tingy shudder that left him a bit ashamed of himself because he hadn't expected it. And there were plenty of other sights just as remarkable. Couples with arms entwined were strolling along together in a kind of maudlin ecstasy, or lingering before the lighted shop fronts. Ladies, real ones again, wearing sort of fur capes and heels that were like something out of a circus balancing act, were standing about in doorways, smiling politely at everyone. Some of them even smiled at Ginger, they were so friendly, and Ginger smiled back, conscious again of the strange, hot feeling inside him. This was life, all right, this was. Better than St. Mark's Avenue, better than South Kensington, better than Hyde Park Corner. A confirmed roux by now, Ginger allowed himself to be swept away by the rapids in the direction of the whirlpool that the current was making for, the great maelstrom of Piccadilly Circus itself. And once there, the sheer intoxication of the scene overwhelmed him. It was terrific. For a start, the whirlpool arrangement made such giddy patterns of the traffic. Cars and buses were sucked in front from side tributaries, sent twirling round the rock in the centre, and then slung contemptuously away up one side of the canyons. And the noise! Noise on every side, the lovely, discordant, melodious noise of a great city. Motor horns, the clatter of passing feet, laughter, and paper sellers shouting about murders and fires and rail smashes. Then the ladies again, the real ones with the fur coats and the golden curls. There seemed to be a great many of them in this part of London. And as though all this pageantry, this metropolitan pomp were not sufficient, the front of the buildings blazed and danced and dazzled with 1,000 lights. It was everything that Ginger had ever dreamt of. It was adventure. It was success. It was fulfilment. It was El Dorado. It was Alleluia. Alleluia. "Caw," said Ginger. "I bet I found it. I bet this is St. Paul's. I bet it's St. Paul's if it isn't Paddington." Oh, bless his little socks. How are we doing? The poor orphans have never had a day out. It's more like a workhouse with that laundry, and the girls are not allowed to speak. Absolutely. This is my favourite book after Narrowboat, says Turbo Stream. It's a brilliant book. It really is. A hard knock life indeed. A hard knock life. Oh, dear. I like the way he weaves the character stories together. Yes, it's like, you know, Sid Harris, right at the beginning, a bus. I love that about Norman Collins. He introduces these characters, and you think of them as minor characters. And it is all, I mean, it's because he comes from the sort of TV world and film world, it is like you've got a cast of extras, and you would naturally use them again. If you've got them, you know, so it was like, oh, if you're going to have a bus, yeah, we had a bus driver, didn't we? We'll use him again. And it's the fact that he gets onto that same bus and only we are privy to it. I love that about it. Absolutely love that. He left the circus very reluctantly. It was easily the best spot that he had struck so far. The best spot in the whole world, he reckoned. And the way he was walking through Haymarket and Trafalgar Square towards Whitehall, it was getting rottener all the time. It was all right again on the embankment. There were trams, and some of the noisiest trams that Ginger had ever discovered, and a boat of some kind was going downriver. Her navigation lights were gleaming. He stood looking after her until she disappeared round the bend by Blackfriars. But Ginger had a new difficulty to contend with now. He was sleepy again. He decided, therefore, he would take a short nap before beginning the long journey back to Putney. And it was then that he discovered a most extraordinary thing. Purely by luck, and without knowing it, he had stumbled on London's largest bedroom. There were sleepers on all the benches. Old men, old women, and figures so nondescript that they couldn't have said whether you couldn't have said what they were unless he'd asked them. With their mufflers and their bundles and their tin kettles and gaping shoes, they were all quietly dozing. There was some difficulty then finding a bench for himself. He didn't exactly fancy having any of these for a bedfellow, but he found an empty bench at last and sank down onto it with the rumble of Hungerford Bridge and the rattle of the trains to soothe him. "Only a short one," he kept saying to himself, "just long enough so I don't feel sleepy." He was saying this when he fell asleep, and it was 6 o'clock next morning when he woke up. Chapter... Oh, what's L? What's L? What were we on? Is it 30? What did we... Well, that was chapter... Wait a minute. 39, was it? Yes, that was 39. We've slipped through chapter. I wasn't paying attention. 38, 39, 40, XL. Oh, XL's 40, is it? X10, L... What is L, then? In Roman numerals. So I don't know my Roman numerals. XL, 40. Is L 30, then? 10 plus 30. Is that how it works? Never quite worked that out. Excuse my ignorance, ladies and gentlemen. Such an ignorant man. How dare he go on the internet with his ignorance and his egghead and his silly voices. That night Ginger spent beside the Thames was a notable night, also for another member of the Bodkin community. It was, in fact, the night upon which Mr. Pavarius ultimately prevailed. Oh, 50? Nigel Sadler says 50. L is 50. Well, it can't be 50, can it? We were on... Well, that's... We were on third... Oh, wait a minute. Well, there's something strange going on here. Chapter XXX, which is 10, 10, 10, 30, V, 111, 8, 38. Then we went to 39, XXX, 1X, which must be 39, surely. The next chapter... is XL, it says here. Well, that can't be right. It must be 40. It should be XXX, shouldn't it? Then we go to XL1. So I reckon there's someone's made a bit of a cock-up here. There are no pages missing. $40 would be XXXX or XL. Oh, well, I said it was XL. I did say it was XL. Oh, right, okay, so that's what it is then. It is 40. Oh, sorry, you confused me when you said it was 50. But you mean the L is 50? Yes. See how ignorant I am? Please leave me for a moment to sit there quietly and contemplate disappearing in a puff of logic. To quote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yes, I know. Right. Yes, the night that Ginger spent beside the Thames was a notable night also for another member of the Bodkin community. It was, in fact, the night upon which Mr. Pavarius ultimately prevailed. After that disastrous episode in the Cannon Street station waiting room, with the dark red rose in his lapel wilting from the sheer shame of it, it might well have seemed that everything would be up forever between Sidney Pavarius and Desiree. Is it Desiree? I've forgotten how we call her name now. Desiree, beg your pardon. Desiree Standish. But that would be without reckoning Mr. Pavarius's remarkable powers of persistence. Indeed, rather than slacken, he redoubled his effects. After discovering the letters, postcards, telegrams, even telephone calls were contemptuously ignored or rejected, Mr. Pavarius resorted to the personal touch. In his best clothes, and with a bunch of flowers held already in his hands, he started to haunt the Charing Cross Road. He had already tried the simpler method of seeing Desiree by ringing up Mr. Spike Jerome and asking for an appointment, but Mr. Jerome was always ready to see him because Mr. Paverius was not merely a songwriter, but a hit songwriter by now. The reception side of the business, however, had been terrible. Desiree had shown Mr. Paverius in as coldly as if he had been a sanitary inspector, and had kept her nose, her face, and whole of her whole being most offensively averted. What was even worse was the fact that Mr. Paverius emerged into What was even worse was the fact that as Mr. Paverius emerged into the outer office, Desiree was always on the phone to some unknown passionate admirer who was apparently offering her the choice of the Savoy, the Berkeley, or Quaglinos, whatever that is, with Drury Lane or Covent Garden or the London Hippodrome thrown in as a make-weight. In the result, Mr. Paverius became desperate. He planned sudden encounters, shadowing, abduction even. And in the end, it was a bunch of blue and green carnations, St. Vitus Freak they're called, that did the trick. He'd been standing out on the pavement for nearly half an hour when Desiree came down the front stairs. And as soon as he saw her, he slipped forward and thrust the bundle, one dozen of each of the blue and the green, and 9/10 of maiden fair fern, straight into her arms. The whole thing was so sudden and unexpected that Desiree offered no resistance. She grabbed hold of the parcel instinctively, and it was there that she made her mistake. Because once it was in her grasp, there was nothing she could do about it but stand there and go on holding it. It was too big for her to be able to see over it, and she simply let it fall. And if she simply let it fall, she was not sure that she would be able to step across it without stumbling. So firmly she mustered all the professional charm she knew and fired off her entire social broadside. Without a quiver in her voice and speaking from somewhere hidden behind the enormous pyramid of damp tissue paper, she said in her politest voice, "If a gentleman gives lady flowers, it is sometimes politer if he offers to carry them for her." And that, of course, Mr. Paverius knew. By that, of course, Mr. Paverius knew that everything was going to be all right. And to show that he was ready to make things easy for both of them, he pretended that each of them had really known who the other was all the time. What? And he pretended that each of them had known who the other was all the time, and that the fairly prince and beggar maid stuff had been so much innocent fun, mere nursery teasing. Oh, I see, yes, because she had pretended to be this... That's right. Desiree had pretended to be this nursery maid who had put the advert in the paper, and he had pretended to be this Indian colonel who had answered the advert, and then they'd met, and it was embarrassing. And then now he's going, oh, I knew it was you, and you knew it was me, and, we were meant for each other, I think is where that all goes. Wow. Quaglinos. How do you pronounce that? Quaglinos. Looks good. Never heard of it. Quaglinos. Altogether, the whole reunion passed off most agreeably. It was not indeed until quite near the end of the evening, by which time Mr. Paverius was beginning to wonder how he was going to account to Dr. Trump for his long absence, that he discovered why it was that Desiree had suddenly become so astonishingly forthcoming. And, at first mention, the reason proved rather disquieting one. It was simply because she happened at the moment to be quite unusually hard up. This time, moreover, there was no attempt at concealment, nothing about rehatching the stables of the old place down in Sussex, nothing about extra singing lessons for her kid sister at the ballet school, nothing about the brilliant young brother of hers or the sea cadet who had just passed out at Sandhurst with all the diplomas and medals and things. No, it was all humble and straightforward and personal. It was the rent of her room, already 3 weeks overdue, that was worrying her. As soon as the position had been fully explained to him, Mr. Pavarius patted her hand and told her not to worry. His knee was already pressed up hard against hers as he said it, and there was a pleasantly reassuring feeling of contact and intimacy in the whole encounter. He did not, however, speak again immediately, and that was because he was thinking hard. In his present-day prosperity as Mr. Berkeley Cavendish, the 10 guineas was nothing to him. He even had enough notes on him to pay her there and then. But he checked himself. Wouldn't it be rather a waste, he reflected? Wouldn't it be simply pouring good money after bad? Instead, he moved up closer still, and dropping his voice a little, he took Desiree's hand in his. "It doesn't matter so much about the rent," he says. "That's only trifle anyway. But it isn't just a room that a girl like you wants. It's a home, dear, somewhere where you can really call your own. I know that Deirdre Gardens isn't good enough, but it's yours. For the asking, sweetie pie, just as long as I can look in and see you sometimes." When Desiree did not reply immediately, the Deirdre Gardens, by the way, is his pied-à-terre, isn't it? His little, that he rents from the, whatever they're called, the Lewises. When Desiree did not reply immediately, Mr. Pavarius made no attempt to rush her. He just sat there whistling softly through his teeth. And finally, simply to bridge the gap and save her any embarrassment, he ordered 2 more Benedictines from the waiter. Indeed, he rather respected her for her indecision. Maiden innocence at the crossroads that had always seemed to him to be one of the most moving of all human situations, and he would not have missed it for a moment. And it was not until Desiree had given him her answer, "Well, we eat to live, and I suppose beggars can't be choosers, can they?" were her exact words, that he gave her the invaluable guidance of his advice. And if they've really been so horrid to my little Popsy at the old place," he said, still in the same low, purring kind of voice, "I should think twice before paying up your arrears if I was you. There's Deirdre Gardens waiting for you just as soon as you want it, and you ought to be able to take most of your things out in a small attaché case, and you could always iron them out afterwards. It doesn't matter how many journeys you make. It's a free country. They can't stop you going up and down the stairs. The one thing you mustn't do is move the big suitcase. So all it boils down to is what costs more, 3 weeks' rent or another big suitcase. There's a sale on at the little shop at New Oxford Street." We're on chapter 41. Seafood is abundant in St. James in London, frequented by the Royal, but closed at this moment. Ah, yes, I'm sure it is. We're coming up to 10:02. Golly, that hour went really quickly. Well, we might have to stop there because we're beginning on a longish chapter with a new thing, and we start again with Ginger. So I don't want to crowd in there. That was very unexpected to suddenly find ourselves at 10:02. So it looks like Desiree is moving in to the pied-à-terre of Mr. Pavarius under the name of Berkeley Cavendish. Ginger is out on the town living with the tramps in London, sleeping until 6 a.m. And Sweetie is terribly worried. Dr. Trump has Mrs. Warple living there, who seems to be happier than ever. And something's cooking on that front. We don't know what's happened to Mr. Dawlish. And Spud is waiting desperately for Ginger to return. What will happen? Tune in next week on Monday. We will continue. Quanglinos, however you pronounce it, is one up from McDonald's, says Edward Moulding. Doesn't sound like anything that I want to get involved with then. Good book, enjoyable. Thank you, Richard, says Peter Coombs. Excellent, nice reading. Sorry for the interlude. I have always had a big mouth, LOL. That's okay. Well, we got the Vogue show coming up later on tonight, so plenty of space for anybody who's got a big or small mouth to do it. Martin Cannon said, enjoy it. Thanks a lot, Richard. No problem. Thank you very much for coming along. Do give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, which would be very kind. And we will see you on Monday with more of this. The Vogue show's got some art and hopefully some videos. And although I'm not sure if we've got any, well, I think 1 or 2 videos have come in actually talking about that. And then it's the weekend. So marvellous. I love this book reading, says Audrey Forbes. Thank you so much. It is a lovely book. It is a lovely book. And I'm thoroughly enjoying reading it. I love Norman Collins's work. There's a couple of his books which are not as hot, I have to say. This is one, I read this and I was just tickled pink. I mean, it was about 10 years ago I read it. It's a fantastic book. I really, really enjoy it. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you so much. Do look after yourselves. And if you're coming back to the Vogue show for tonight at 8 o'clock UK time, I will see you then. But in the meantime, take care and thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Bye.